Eternal Champions is gonna eat your old fighting games for lunch. No wonder it has 9 huge warriors, 3 training modes, and over 315 martial arts moves. Bon appetit. Eternal Champions, only on Sega Genesis.
The early 90s were a great time for video games, not only because my love of the hobby was in full swing with my recent purchase of a Sega Genesis, but because it was also the time in which 2 fighting games released, bringing the entire genre into the forefront: Street Fighter II and the original Mortal Kombat. The smash success of these games in arcades led to the inevitable: home console ports. Sure, you got ports of those arcade classics, but it also spawned the likes of fighting games that didn't have the marketing muscle, or arguably the gameplay mechanics, of the heavy hitters. Games like World Heroes and Saturday Night Slam Masters were fun romps with friends, for sure. But then you had the slightly lesser tier titles, games that didn't quite make the cut in regards to quality, games like Shaq Fu, Pit Fighter, and the topic of this episode of West vs. Backlog Retro, Eternal Champions.
Eternal Champions, only on Sega Genesis.
Whoa.
Eternal Champions was released in 1993 for the Sega Genesis in North America and 1994 for the Mega Drive and PAL territories. It was a standard 8-way directional fighting game, much like Street Fighter II, where you had either 3 or 6 action buttons depending on the controller you had on your system. If you had a 6-button controller, or the oft-forgotten Sega Activator, you could use 3 punches and 3 kicks. However, if you had a 3-button controller, like a lot of us did, you could hit the start button to toggle between the 3 buttons acting as kicks or punches. The game has 9 characters to choose from, all 9 being chosen by an eternal champion that notes their worth and value to mankind and the greater good, and thinks that they are worth saving from the untimely deaths they are about to experience. The Eternal Champion literally teleports these fighters, who are mere seconds away from their death in their real life, to a grand fighting tournament where they can showcase their abilities and be safe from death. The winner is then transported back to before they would have died in their real life with the knowledge of their fate and be provided with an opportunity to save themselves from turmoil. Now, that's a lot of story and information to be sure, but how does the game itself play? Not so hot, I'm afraid. Let's get it straight. I have a soft spot for this game, as it was one of the first I ever owned for my Sega Genesis, but that doesn't mean it was actually a super good fighting game. Going back and playing it showed me a few things, namely that the controls are not so good, and the AI is pretty unforgiving. Something really neat, though, is that there were things like overkills, which acts as sort of a stage fatality. And they're pretty fun and easy to do once you kind of see where the trigger on the stage is to make them happen at the end of the fights. So while there are definite pros and cons to the game, the real reason I felt compelled to do a West vs. Backlog Retro on Eternal Champions is the history this video game provides. See, Sega of America wanted this to really take off, so they invested in things like comic book tie-ins, a sequel, which we'll get to in a minute, and a few spin-off games I'd actually like to talk about. One for the Game Gear, called Chicago Syndicate, and the other, the much derided Experts on Sega Genesis. Released in 1996 on the Sega Genesis, Experts is a side-scrolling action game where Eternal Champion character Shadow Yamamoto forms a vigilante group to stop some terrorists that want to detonate a thermonuclear device from an undersea weapons factory. More noteworthy, however, is that Experts might be the worst Sega Genesis game I've ever played. Ever. I mean, I remember seeing magazine advertisements that made this game look really cool in like old issues of Game Fan or Electronic Gaming Monthly, but actually playing it was ugh. You control the 3 experts at the same time, and you do things like unlock elevators, and you ride some elevators, and you occasionally kick or punch things, and then you go to a terminal to press some buttons, and you can do cool things like unlock a door, or you guessed it, unlock an elevator. Yeah, experts won't be making any of my top 10 Genesis games list anytime soon. It's a hard pass. Trust me, don't play that. You don't want to play experts. Ugh. But in slightly better news, the other spin-off game, titled Chicago Syndicate, fares quite a bit better in my opinion. The game came out on the Game Gear in 1995, and it's also a side-scrolling action game, but this one features Eternal Champions character Larson Tyler on his quest to rid the streets of Chicago from all nefarious activity while working as a police informant. So the controls, in my opinion, are better than experts, and the sense of place is way better than experts. But the overall controls still feel slightly stilted, and I'm not sure if that's because it's a Game Gear game, or if that's because, the screen's so small. However, it feels like you actually accomplish things in this game, like fighting bad guys and trekking across areas, instead of just, waiting around in front of terminals, unlocking elevators. Oh my god, Experts was so bad. So even if Eternal Champions had spin-offs that weren't the greatest games to ever come out, the initial fighting game was successful enough to warrant an official sequel called Eternal Champions: Challenge from the Dark Side, which was released in 1995 for the Sega CD. The game acted as a semi-sequel to the first one, and as a second game in a planned trilogy of fighting games. Eternal Champions: Challenge from the Dark Side featured the original 9 characters, plus 13 more, 9 of them which were hidden, including the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses III, a pirate named Riptide, and a desperado named Dawson McShane. Something to note about the game is that because of the upgrade to Sega CD, there is a much higher focus on full-motion video cutscenes, not only for the new overkills called Cinekills, but for storyline progression, and even the slick intro cinematic explaining the overall story.
Ramses III, 151 BC, last of the great pharaohs, lost in the river of time. Trident, 110 BC, hero of Atlantis, sealing that island's fate when defeated by Roman treachery.
The game was also much more gory, and was the first game to carry Sega's Deep Water warning, which Sega of America created to denote a game had adult content. The game is also infamous for being one of the first M-rated games as rated by the ISDA, which later became the ESRB. Some of the stage overkills were so outrageous, they literally caused me to laugh out loud as I was playing this game to get footage. I mean, literally, let's just take a moment just to enjoy this majestic scene of 90s ridiculousness. Ah, the 90s. Great stuff, right? So, whatever happened to Eternal Champions? Well, in the early 90s, while Sega of America was plugging away on distribution rights for tie-in content for Eternal Champions and development of sequels, Sega of Japan had their own take on the fighting genre, and felt that Sega of America's focus could be better spent supporting Sega of Japan's fighting series. What game is that, you ask? Well, you may have heard of it.
Well, Doc, I've been playing that new Virtua Fighter on my Genesis 32X, and it's so realistic, man, you know? Anyway, I've been getting pounded. I thought I should get my head checked out, make sure there's no damage, man. I mean, no more than usual, right, Doc? Anyway, it's got features you can't get on any other system. All the arcade characters, instant replay, 7-cam reviews, man, it works! What was I talking about?
Virtua Fighter on 32X.
That's right, in the bidding war between Eternal Champions and Virtua Fighter, Sega put all of its eggs within the Virtua Fighter basket, much to the industry's delight. I personally think Virtua Fighter 4 and 5 are some of the best fighting games ever made, so I would argue that Sega made the right choice in backing the Japanese powerhouse, as Virtua Fighter as a series has gone on to make over $5.5 million, over 17 games, and is widely considered the grandfather of 3D fighting games. Virtua Fighter's importance is so strong, it's actually part of the Smithsonian Institution's permanent research collection on information technology innovation, and it's the only video game on permanent display at the National Museum of American History. I don't care who you are, you're not going to compete with that. But say you're feeling nostalgic and you want to grab a copy of Eternal Champions. Well, you're in luck. If you'd like to play Eternal Champions, you can find it currently complete in box on the Sega Genesis for a whopping $8 on eBay. Or you can play the official emulation version via Steam for $2.99, which is also the average going rate for just the cart on the Genesis if you look at places like eBay. It's a great little keepsake for the fighting game boom, and for less than $10 for a genuine, full, legit copy for like archival purposes, I mean, you could do much worse. It's nice to have that little piece of 90s history in your collection. And with all that being said, it's often fun to think about what could have been, if Eternal Champions had taken off in the same way as Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, or Virtua Fighter. Would we be seeing Eternal Champions 6 at EVO? Would E3 conventions be littered with Eternal Champions cosplayers? Would there be an Eternal Champions themed loot crate? The world may never know. Or will they? Early in 2017, Eternal Champions creator Michael Latham discussed wanting to create a new title in the Eternal Champions lexicon, and recently showed a few renders of what could be in a recent Shoryuken.com forum post, if fan support and backing make it happen. The project is currently called Eternal Successors and is currently being workshopped from within Unreal Engine 4. Consider me intrigued, to say the very least. And this is where we wrap things up, kids. Eternal Champions may get a bum rap from many, but I truly have a soft spot and genuine love for this little game. I think the characters are interesting, the premise is a good one, and the overall gameplay mechanics work reasonably well. Sure, it's no Street Fighter 2 when it comes to legacy, but Eternal Champions shows us the beauty that was early 90s video games. If you had a modest budget, a good idea, some technical know-how, you could get the resources together to create brand new IPs that brought something interesting to the table and, be talked about for decades to come. But guys, that's my time. I hope you enjoyed this look, a blast to the past of Eternal Champions on this Wes vs. Backlog Retro. I'm your host, Wes Gardner. You can find me on Twitter at twitter.com/CommieToHobo. You can also hit me up on Facebook at the official Commie to Hobo Facebook page at facebook.com/CommieToHobo. We have made our triumphant return to Twitch, so if you go head over to twitch.tv/CommieToHobo, you can see us live multiple times a week playing all sorts of games. And of course, for all of the past archives of Wes vs. Backlog, podcasts, whatever you may need, head on over to CommieToHobo.com. It's been a lot of fun, guys. I'm going to kick back, play some more Eternal Champions. I'm loving it. I love this episode. I love this game. Oh, it's a good one. Sometimes it's good to play something a little bad. You know what I mean? Take care. We're going to see you guys here next time on Wes vs. Backlog Retro.